Okay, you're on,
Okay.
Greg.
All right. All right, it's noon. We have over 100 participants, and that number is growing. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I feel like this is as close as we're going to get to an annual AAS field trip. So if you want to like gear up, go ahead. Now's your time. But I'm excited about this event. And it emerged as an idea from within our new outreach committee. So the branch of community science is one that we intentionally tried to build. I want to thank Catherine Scott and Marshal Hedin and Sebastian Escovery and Eileen Heppitz, who really helped to think about how to frame this. One of our goals is to, actually, before I say that too, I want to point out, I want to thank Sebastian for pointing out that community science is a more inclusive way to frame what we've been calling citizen science. So it makes no point about citizenship or anything, it's simply community science. So we're going forward with that name for the subcommittee. I know many of you in our community are doing active and excellent community science, and we really appreciate that. One of our goals with the Outreach Committee in general and this branch is to really try to unify these efforts, create a framework for supporting it within our website, and share with each other what we're learning from the experience. And I know that I've learned from starting these discussions that there's a range of opinions about iNaturalist as a tool for these efforts. And we're not in any way pointing out that this is the only tool for community science. It's simply one that that we want to talk about the utilities for, and Marshall will elaborate on that quite a lot. So I want to just take a moment. So when I was thinking about this, when we were thinking about this in the executive committee, Marshall's mind came to mind for me because I'm pretty new and inexperienced in social media. And Marshall is one of the few people that I was following early on. And he posts things, he posted an overview of all of the spiders, all the salticids he'd contributed to iNaturalist in a year. And it was spectacular. And it made me realize that this is something that I wanted to pay more attention to. It's been in the margins of my personal goals for a while, but also it's got incredible power for being a tool that is useful. I'll take a moment just to introduce Marshall. I think Marshall is one of the members of our community that doesn't really need an introduction. He was formerly president of the society. But for any of you who are joining us from around the world, I'll just tell you a little bit more about Marshall. So Marshall grew up in California near a beautiful area near Mount Shasta in the north. He is one of the people who is one of the best naturalists that I know. Like walking through the forest with Marshall is great because he knows not just the spiders, but the plants, and he's just a broad naturalist. He did his PhD with Ellen Templeton at Washington University in St. Louis. I got to know Marshall when we were both in Wayne Madison's lab at Arizona, which was fantastic. Being in the Sonoran Desert with Marshall was a gift. And he's currently a professor, and I just learned will be associate chair of biology at San Diego State University. So I'm so grateful to have his energies being put towards this. So I'm going to transition this to Catherine Scott, some of the co-chair of the outreach subcommittee, to talk a little bit more about the structure of the talk.
Thank you. So I just wanted to quickly say hi, thank you so much for being here. And I'm going to moderate the questions and discussion after Marshall finishes talking. So what I'd like to suggest is that if, as Marshall is talking, you have a question, type it in the chat box. And I'm going to try to keep track of the order in which people type questions. And then at the end, I'll call on you to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself, because I'd rather see your face and have us be able to have a conversation. But that way, if we don't get through all the questions, there'll be a record of them in the chat box, and we can try to contact people or figure out how to continue the conversation afterwards. So I think that's all I want to say. Thanks.
We're good to go?
You bet.
Awesome. So as Greta suggests, I've been a naturalist kind of forever. And about a dozen years ago, one of the founders of iNaturalist reached out to me to start to use the platform. And I put a few harvestman images up there and nothing really happened. And then about 5 years ago, I could kind of see that the platform was starting to explode. So I revisited iNaturalist and started thinking about the potential. And when I first joined and started to contribute to iNaturalist, it was really kind of a personal pursuit, but that's kind of shifted for me. And over the past few years, I've kind of thought about how not only how I can kind of contribute to the greater good and arachnid knowledge around the world, but maybe how a group of people can come together and do this through iNaturalist. So I was thinking about that, and then Greta suggested to me this committee, and I kind of hemmed and hawed. I was like, oh, I'm pretty busy, but it's not really an opportunity that I can overlook, and I'm really thankful that I have this opportunity. So thanks to Catherine and Sebastian and Eileen and Greta in particular. So this kind of workshop talk, I'm first going to introduce you to iNaturalist and show you what it can do. I'll break out of PowerPoint and just go to the web-based iNaturalist, basically showing you the kind of the bells and whistles that are available in the platform. And I'll provide some examples of how iNat facilitates outreach and learning, and how it can also facilitate the examples that I show will be arachnid research. And then we'll go really kind of maybe to the most important part of this event is discussing how iNaturalist and the society might come together and use the platform as a portal to reach more people. So when I suggest or present this final part, these are really just ideas that Catherine and I have come up with initially, but it's really kind of a society conversation to ask where we're going to move forward with this. Okay, so Catherine suggests that you just contemplate your questions and add them as we go along. One of the things I want to point out before I get into iNaturalist that is extremely important from an outreach perspective is that in comparison to competition, other types of platforms, iNaturalist is global. It's translated to many languages and more every day, and it's very accessible. So really the only thing that you need to use iNaturalist is a phone, maybe a phone in concert with a laptop or a desktop, but really all you need is a phone. So I'm really inspired by stories that I hear of people that are in parts of the world where they cannot access books or experts or take classes, but they have a phone and they have an interest in biodiversity, and they go out and observe maybe spiders or other arachnids, and then they learn about them kind of from other people in different parts of the world. And I think that's just a wonderful thing. Okay, so now I'm gonna go to iNaturalist itself. So if you, and I'm gonna be showing you iNaturalist through my desktop. Obviously, it also works through a phone. It's easy to find, iNaturalist.org. So I'm here, and I will go in. And the first thing that I want to show you and share with you has to do with their mission, what they consider their mission to be. So, sorry, let me back up and show you how I did that. So I went to the bottom of the page, And over here, there's an About tab, and I went to the About tab. So I'm here in this page called What Is It? And here they talk about what they consider their mission to be. And I think this is important for kind of the context of this workshop. So it says that their primary goal is to connect people to nature, get people to feel about the non-human world and how that might have personal significance and how it's worth protecting. So it has an obvious relationship to conservation. So that is the primary goal of this platform. The secondary goal is to generate biodiversity data that is somehow scientifically useful and might be used in research. But as they suggest, if they can connect people to nature without actually contributing to research, they're fine. That is what they want to do. So in essence, this kind of research component or this outreach component comes in front of before the research component. And I kind of see maybe the community science subcommittee in the society as playing a similar role. We're trying to connect to people and allow people to learn more about arachnids through iNaturalist, and whether or not we can actually conduct research or facilitate research as a society should be a secondary goal. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple of quick videos, each of them about 30 seconds, and they may be kind of choppy on your end. If they're choppy, you can always just go back to them. So one of the videos is right here in this About tab. And we'll listen to that.
iNaturalist is a social network where anyone can record and share their photographs of living things. When you share a photograph on iNaturalist, it becomes more than just a picture. It becomes an observation. It's a record of an organism in a place at a time. Each observation is shared with a global community of naturalists, where it can be identified, discussed, and used to give us a greater understanding of life on Earth. Wherever you are, biodiversity is there too. Get out and observe it.
Okay. So then the second video that I want to show you, if we go to the top of the page, we're out of this About page on the bottom, and we go to the top of the page, there's kind of 4 standard tabs here. And the one on the right, More, has these video tutorials. And if you're new to iNaturalist, these will be very important to you. Basically summarizing some of the things that I'll talk about. So how to add an observation if you're on a phone, how to add via the web. It has some tips for taking better photographs of whatever you might be photographing. Spiders, harvestmen, etc. How to identify things, etc. So let's watch this quick video on how to make an observation using your phone.
Okay, so you've installed the iNaturalist app and created an account. Time to get outside and record your first observation. Here's how to do it. Any living thing, like a plant, animal, or fungus, can be an observation on iNaturalist. Once you find something you'd like to record, just tap Observe and take a photo. You can review your picture, then hit Next if it looks good. To identify it, hit What did you see? If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name. On this observation details screen, you can add more photos of the same organism or write a note. date, time, and location have been automatically added. You can also change the geoprivacy of the observation, mark whether it's captive or cultivated, or add it to a project. Once you're finished, just hit share, and your observation will be uploaded for everyone to see and identify. That's it. Keep on exploring and sharing.
Okay, so let me show you some of the things that iNaturalist can do. And we'll start with the, let's just start, I've signed in, and let's say I typically go to my dashboard. And my dashboard is going to look like this, and it has a feed of things, spiders and some jumping spiders and some harvestmen. And I have subscribed to these taxa. So I've used this little bell here, and I've subscribed to a taxon. Everything in iNaturalist is pretty phylogenetic. So I look at spiders, all spiders and their common ancestor, or salticids, or Habernatus, or harvestmen. So I can subscribe to a taxon, and that stuff will just show up in my feed. I can also subscribe to a place. Let's say that I'm interested in San Diego, whatever, you know. So that's what kind of defines what this first page will look like. Let's go back up to these 4 primary tabs. And we'll go to the Explore tab. And I just want to show you kind of how many people are using iNaturalist. So I'm going to click off of this. That's a geographic filter. And it's kind of cranking away. There's a lot of information here. So this is an example of how popular iNaturalist has become. So to date, over 1 million people have used and observed things using iNaturalist, and they've observed over 42 million different life forms. So that's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of potential data, but it's a lot of just inspiration. So of course I can then, let's say, narrow this thing down. Let's say that I'm interested in arachnids. Everything, all the boxes kind of fill automatically. And North America. So it'll take some time, and it'll show you kind of what people have been doing with arachnids in North America. So that's not too bad. So that's just a general example of the reach of iNaturalist. I'm going to go over here to this taxa information. And again, iNaturalist is a platform, especially on the desktop, where you should just get on there and look at things. It's really kind of easy to learn. And again, they have those video tutorials to help you, but everything is very intuitive here. So if we go to, again, taxa information, this is a place to learn about different clades of life. So iNaturalist has been generous to provide a unique icon for arachnids and a page for arachnids. So we'll go to there. And this is going to tell us what, how many people and how many taxa in the world have been observed. So over 1 million arachnids worldwide. And there's a map at the bottom. iNaturalist has wonderful mapping features that happen kind of dynamically and automatically. So people in the world have observed arachnids essentially worldwide, which is pretty cool. We can go up to see who is active in identifying arachnids in the world. And whoever Tiger BB is, maybe you're here watching, You are a wonderful person. That is tremendous effort in identifying all of those animals for other people. When you add information to iNaturalist, you can annotate in various ways. So it allows you to see things like seasonality, life stage, and sex. So we can go to the history of observations for arachnids, and this is kind of cool. You can see that iNaturalist has been gaining in popularity over time, and it continues to grow. Even in the context of COVID, we have a lot of recent growth, which I think is pretty remarkable. It also shows you that most people that observe arachnids must live in the northern hemisphere because there's a drop off in the winter. So this is research grade observations in green, and these are unverified up in gray. There's some kind of demographic or phenological, ecological information here on life stage. So adults, juveniles, eggs, no annotation. And I'll come back to this, but I think annotations are really important because we can derive information from them. And this is sex. So kind of the same thing. Not really, we don't really know, and then males, females, can't tell. If we go down to the About page, it's just going to take us to Wikipedia. But again, this page overall is a pretty nice place to kind of start to learn about arachnids. So it takes you to the Wikipedia page, and then you can go on from there. There's some trends and observations over recent time. Taxa that have been observed a lot. So there we go. And we can go to the taxonomy page. The taxonomy of iNaturalist, I would say, frankly, kind of varies in quality across taxa. But for example, for spiders, they use the World Spider Catalog taxonomy at the family level and below. Anything above that, superfamilies, et cetera, it's kind of dependent upon who is curating the taxon to develop the taxonomy. But iNaturalist, as I suggest, is very taxonomic in its scope. So it thinks a lot about kind of species and what their common ancestor are. Okay. I'm going to quickly go up to how I might identify something. So again, I'm here in this More tab, and I go to Identify. We're going to test my knowledge. Abernatus. That's going to autofill. Paradise spiders, North America, go. Let's take a look at what people have been seeing. So then I click on that. There's a map. There's the image. They think it's Abernatus pyrithrax. I'm an identifier. Abernatus pyrithrax from this part of California. It's got modified third legs. Yeah, that's what it is. So we've kind of moved on in the identification of that particular image. And I can just right click, go to the next. Here's an observer in northern Georgia. That's a female. It's a female of the Abernatus cicatus group. I can tell because of her abdominal markings. Cicatus is really the only taxon there, so I'll agree with Gift Beaton on that. I'm going to do like 500 of these, so this could take a while. I'm kidding. That's enough of that? You guys think that's enough of that? So let's go and upload an observation. So I'm going to go to this green page. And I got a little test file right here. I'm going to throw it in there. This is from my phone. So the metadata is already embedded in the image. So that means there's a date and a time and a place already embedded in the image. Now, there's a note function here. Let's say that, you know, this is a natural history forum, so I know something about this. Let's add a little bit of natural history information. All right. I'm going to allow the something happened. Let me do that again. I'm not really sure what happened. So, sorry. I can't really, there we go. So iNaturalist is gonna, let's say I add some tags just about the taxonomy. I can add it to a project if I want to, some projects that pop up. I can also add a field, and this is annotation data that we can use later. So let's say something about its burrow, and say the burrow there, in this case, is a turret, okay? So now we have a time and a place and a little bit of node information. This is where it gets interesting. So I just have to hover my cursor over the species name, and iNaturalist, the machine learning component of iNaturalist, will suggest what I have observed. So let's do that, and it's going to load some suggestions. And the one on top is going to be pretty conservative. So they're pretty sure it's in the genus Adipoides, and then it'll go down from there. So this is in fact a California turret spider. It's based that on a combination of the images in the database and machine learning and model training. And it also includes some geographic information because the geographic information is embedded in my image. So the California turret spider is similar to what I've seen, even though it's not a spider, it's just its nest. And it's been seen nearby. So I can say, yeah, I think that's what it is, and I'll submit it. I'll go up and clean those later. Okay, I don't really want these messing up my iNaturalist page, but whatever. Let's see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about in uploading those observations. I don't think so. So I'm going to leave for now and go back to this presentation. So again, this is a very important part of iNaturalist, the computer vision model, and it was started a few years ago. And you can look at the distribution of the number of observations in iNaturalist versus the number of species. And what they did was took a certain proportion of species that had a threshold number of observations. So in this case, there's this number of species with at least 20 research grade observations. Research grade means that a few people have verified that observation or agree in that observation. And then what they do is use those images to train a model and basically take new images and suggest that it is what it is. So the machine learning aspect, of course, is very important and will continue to improve over time as we add more research grade observations to the database. So basically what we want to do for spiders and other arachnids is that there are lots of species that are out in this range where there are very few images and maybe they're not research grade. But if we, as a community, verify more of them, we'll push them in this direction, thus allowing iNaturalist to become a more powerful tool for arachnids, a more powerful identification tool, and as such, a more powerful outreach tool. I think of platforms like eBird or eButterfly, where there's a lot of verified images and the taxa are fairly well known. There's no reason that we can't push arachnids into that space. There is simply no reason. So that's kind of a dream of mine, or something that I think we should think about. Okay, so those are kind of some bells and whistles. If we think about how iNaturalist can be used in outreach and learning as a platform to facilitate this, there are many ways to do this. So we can have a bio blitz, and we can use iNaturalist to, let's say, what are the spiders of this national park? So we can use iNaturalist to do that. And of course, it's not virtual per se. We're just maybe out in the field with our phones and experts to various degrees, taking images, putting them into the database, identifying them, and then they're part of this BioBlitz. And a BioBlitz will also be a project, which I'll get to in a second. We can use iNaturalist in the classroom in various ways. And as a society, as we build the arachnid knowledge in iNaturalist, that can percolate to the classroom in various ways for people around the world. There are things called projects, which I'll get to in just a second. And then of course, we can just use, as members of the community, we can just use iNaturalist to learn. So as a society, if we build the database, we are helping individuals learn and become inspired about arachnids. So let me show you a project, and I'll show you this project here called Megalomorphs of the California Floristic Province. But if you go to the projects page on iNaturalist and search for arachnids or spiders, you'll find lots of other types of projects. So some projects can be kind of faunal or geographic in scope. There's a project called the Spiders Minnesota. They're trying to get people in Minnesota interested in all the spiders and document all the spiders in that state. There's a project called Webs, which is about Nebraska arachnids. And this is more of an outreach project where we get people in Nebraska to observe and learn about arachnids. There's a project called Salticidae jumping spider meals. So this is an example where people have annotated their images to show predation, and then we pull all of those images into this project, and it kind of helps us learn about the ecology of this group of animals. So again, that's more than just species identification and place information. It comes from the annotation itself. So let's go back to this California Floristic Province project. So I'm back on the desktop. First, let me show you quickly how to learn more about a BioBlitz or in the classroom. So we go to the More page, and we can go to this video tutorials page. And over here, we have an entire page about managing projects. So it shows you how how projects are built in iNaturalist. We have an entire page devoted to how to run a BioBlitz through iNaturalist. We have an entire page devoted to a teacher's guide. So a lot of people, a lot of teachers in classrooms use iNaturalist in their classes to help their students learn about the biological world. So a project, I'll go up here, and I have a project. I've built a project related to a research project that I have, and it's right here. And it's called the Megalomorph Spiders of the California Floristic Province. So most projects are defined kind of around a taxon or a group of taxa, let's say arachnids and myriapods, and a place, so the state of California or San Diego County. In this case, it's a floristic province, so that includes a little bit of Oregon and California west of the mountains and a little bit of northern Baja. So I've kind of defined the clade that I'm interested in and the geographic space, and as such, then defined the project. And then when people make observations of that taxon within that space, those observations are automatically imported into this project. So I started this project a couple of years ago, hoping that this grant would get funded, and then it got funded. But so it's kind of still something that I'm working on. But the cool thing is that in that span of time, there's been a lot of observations of megalomorph spiders, which you might think is unusual because they're kind of hard to find in this geographic space. And I think the even cooler thing is that, you know, a large number of people have made observations that have made it into the project. Now, the most powerful part of a project from an outreach component comes down here, where I can create a post. And when I create a post, then I talk to everyone who has made an observation, and it's been imported into the project. So it's a wonderful way to communicate with all of the people that have made that type of observation, some of which will be more interested in learning about these animals. So you can just continue to create posts and tell people, you know, why these particular taxa are interesting, etc. So in my estimation, I learn a lot, of course, from the project itself, and that's another thing. Of course, I am learning actively from iNaturalist, but this workshop and talk is about how we can help other people learn as a society. Okay. So I think that's all I want to say about the project. Of course, we can use iNaturalist for research. And here's some examples. This is a paper that Catherine suggested to me. And we're using a combination of museum specimens, which of course we generally always need, but also citizen science information to understand the geographic distribution and the range expansion of a couple of spider taxa. So that's what they did in this paper. And there are literally hundreds of papers now that have used iNaturalist data in some way in a research component, not hundreds of arachnid papers, but hundreds of papers. So we have all of this information, and from a research perspective, we have information about species distributions. We might find rare or new species. If there's annotation, we can have behavior like salticid prey. We learn about their phenologies as we add annotations and more. I think that, and for me, it is true that my natural history knowledge helps to inspire research questions. So in fact, it's true for all researchers that we can perhaps use iNaturalist to inspire our research. a couple of examples for me. So I'm working on this project of Habernatus jumping spiders. And here's now a kind of a friend of mine, a collaborator, who made this observation in Oklahoma of a jumping spider, a male jumping spider that has kind of phenotypes of two different species. So it has kind of a face and front end of a Habernatus borealis, and it has the third legs of a Habernatus cicadus. So it's clearly a hybrid of these two different species, and that hybridization between those two species had never been observed before. So then what happened later is that people up in Pennsylvania, another kind of collaborator of mine now, started to make similar observations of hybrids between these two different species. And now that we know about this, we're in fact going to go collect with my iNaturalist friends and do some research on this hybridization event. Here's quickly another example. Here's a person from California who found these awesome little phalangoted harvestmen. He had no idea what they were. He collected some. We helped him identify them, so then he knew what they were. But then he got really interested in them because he thought they were so cool, so he kept them and he started to feed them and such, and he observed them mating, which has never been observed before, and then he observed them feeding, which has also never been observed before. So it's clear that it is the case that people that are using iNaturalist are making many observations that have really direct research implications, whatever. I'm just more interested in the people getting interested in these animals that they've never thought about before. Okay, so let's move on to the kind of the last part of the talk. And we're now thinking about how the society might facilitate outreach using iNaturalist as the portal. So I don't really like this kind of false divide between people in the society and people outside of the society. We're all just people that are interested maybe in arachnids, but you know, it is our one of our missions as a society, or should be, to obviously inspire and further educate and connect with anyone who is interested in arachnids. And I think that we can do this through iNaturalist. And then of course, the flow goes both ways, because as individuals and maybe as even a society, we can learn from everyone else. And we started to talk about this yesterday in yesterday's forum, where we have a bunch of, or a large number of people that are considered amateurs, which this is language that I don't like, that are making significant contributions. And this could be a way to kind of facilitate and bring those people and bring us closer to them. So, and let me emphasize that these are just preliminary ideas right here. Kind of the central purpose of this talk and workshop is to get the society to brainstorm more ideas. Okay, so I consider this to be the lowest hanging fruit for how we as a society might use iNaturalist in outreach. So every year, or most years, if we're face-to-face, on the last day, we might have a field trip, and it's generally the case, not always the case, but generally the case that a group of arachnologists goes into the field and collects some arachnids, and that's it. No one ever sees them again. There might be a little report on some of the species seen, but it's not an outreach event per se. So it would be really easy to use iNaturalist to make a final day BioBlitz, and we engage members of the community, and then everything that we observe becomes part of the larger database and part of the greater good. And maybe more importantly, the people that we've impacted there locally will themselves say, I like iNaturalist and I'm now interested in arachnids. So we've kind of planted this seed of interest that's, you know, that can then grow. We go to these different communities, we have our meetings, and then we plant these seeds. So I think that that is really a pretty obvious way to use iNaturalist through the well-developed BioBlitz component of that platform. I think we also could coordinate either regional or taxonomic iNaturalist teams and use or include established and new iNaturalist users, many of whom may not be society members, but through this collaboration might become members. And again, I think that's a way to embrace more interested arachnologists, regardless of their situation. I can tell you from personal experience that there are many people on iNaturalist who are not society members, I've never met, but through iNaturalist, they've become inspired to learn a great deal about some of the taxa that they're interested in. And now, you know, I am humble in my knowledge, and I think it's wonderful that anyone can learn and then become an expert on these taxa. So the idea here would then be, we bring all of these people together somehow to do something. Ideas for projects. This is kind of funny. I was working on this talk, and then maybe I just like forgot to finish this slide, I guess. So I don't know what those ideas would be, but now that you know what a project is, you might be able to brainstorm a project. Actually, I have an idea on the next slide. So around the United States, and maybe Canada, maybe Mexico, we have arachnology courses. Students go there and learn arachnids from a regional expert. So maybe we can start to use iNaturalist in these courses, and maybe we can start to collaborate across the courses. So maybe a project would be the arachnid classes of the world. So that means that anyone in a class is actually has kind of access to those other projects to learn from. The important point here is that there is a regional expert that is on hand, so that the students are taking images of things that the expert can then very quickly identify. So they're kind of instantly research grade observations. So I think that's a very nice, important thing. Maybe iNaturalist will facilitate less death in these courses, which maybe is a controversial thing, but I think important in the context of global insect decline, et cetera. Usually what happens in an arachnology course is that students collect and kill a bunch of arachnids which go into, you know, the vapor space. They have no further greater good, and that's not necessarily true, but it is often true. But if most of the observations in those courses were through iNaturalist, then it builds the database, and as such has more reach. So these are other ways that we might build the resource and either directly or indirectly facilitate outreach. That is, if we built it into a platform like eButterfly, then people in all of these classrooms and teachers can use the database. So we might, as a society, have an initiative to get arachnologist legacy or active images onto iNaturalist. Of course, if you look at my iNaturalist page, I have a lot of observations on that page from 1995. iNaturalist did not exist then. I know what the taxa are, I know when and where I collected them, and those images can help build the database. I know of plenty of arachnologists who have taken lots of images in their time. Those images have potential utility here. In the long term, we might hope that we would have high quality images for example, all North American genera, maybe then all North American species, etc. I think I'm almost done. Again, all of this stuff is kind of space for the society and the community to brainstorm ways that we can further develop this tool for outreach. I've already suggested this, but we want to push the needle such that, you know, why aren't spiders as well known as lizards? It kind of pisses me off. But oh, lastly, we might use iNaturalist as a forum for established or formalized common names. The society has a common name committee, and there's a lot of common names on iNaturalist. We might be able to help standardize those. There's a couple of pitfalls and then I'm done. One is that we need to be careful about poachers for taxa that are rare in particular. So rare taxa, if they're formally listed, their geodata is automatically obscured anyway. But let's say that I collect a California trapdoor spider and I forget to obscure the location information. I've seen on iNaturalist people start to kind of go back and poach locations where I've seen animals that are cool, and that we don't want that to happen. So if something is kind of conservation relevant like that, we need to obscure the information, but we need to be careful about iNaturalist becoming a place where people can poach. That happens a lot in lizards, for example, and we don't want it to happen in trapdoor spiders. There's another possible problem in that sometimes people who identify, the process of identification itself becomes, it's just something that they do, and maybe they identify in cases where they don't really know. And this becomes problematic because those observations become research grade and then may mistrain the model. So that is a larger problem in kind of the iNaturalist community. It's not like an ego trip, right? We're not here to stroke our ego and get the most observations we can. That's irrelevant. Another thing that people will always kind of think about and discuss is iNaturalist observations are problematic because there are no vouchers. And that is potentially true, I think, in some cases. I think a pitfall that a lot of people would discuss is that a lot of the images are kind of frassy. They're not very high quality. And there's a high volume of some images. And to that, I just say that we can't, it might be the case that iNaturalist is going to grow in a way where those images become valuable. So we can't just disrespect their value out of hand because me as a person, it looks crappy to me. That doesn't matter. I mean, in 10 years, maybe the machine is just telling us what it is. So we can't underestimate the power of technology moving forward. Okay. I think I'm done. And now we're gonna discuss. Should I unshare? Oh, let me make this comment. So we're gonna share a Google document where people who are interested in this can share your contact information and your ideas. We'll do that later after the meetings. I'm gonna stop sharing, yeah?
Thank you so much, Marshall.
Yeah, awesome.
That was excellent. And there has been some really lively discussion in the comment box, which is awesome. So there have been a lot of questions. A lot of them, I think, already got answered either by other commenters who are already on iNat and know the answers, or by you later on in the talk. But I identified people in order who asked questions, and I want to just try to go through them and call on them to go through in order if you want to ask your question to Marshall about this. And then once we go through these questions, I'll maybe cut them off at some point so that we can start on to the next part, which is the discussion of where we go from here and ideas for how we can be using iNaturalist. So the first person was Rich Bradley. You had a couple questions, but if you want to ask either of them or say anything else, Rich.
Well, I think my first question was about common names, because I've noticed a bunch of unusual common names, but I think Marshall answered this in the presentation, as well as several people responded to me. It does seem like it might be a great way for us to try to settle on a series of useful and hopefully consistent common names that wouldn't necessarily have to correspond to what's been approved by our committee, but it could also be used by the committee to come up with an expanded set of common names. Anyway, that was one thing. I'm not sure that's a question, Marshall. Maybe that's just a statement now, because you already basically answered it. The other thing was about obscure groups, things where even with a great microscope and the ability to take high resolution, high power microscopic images of the genitalia, we still can't figure out what things are. So there are limits. I think one of the nice things about a platform like iNaturalist is the ability to identify those limits. So maybe we could have maybe a focus on how the heck can we get identifications of small aragonine spiders or some of the other more problematic groups where only genitalia at the moment are known as good characters. Maybe we can expand that. So Marshall, you're nodding your head. Go ahead and maybe amplify that point.
Yeah, I would say that, again, we shouldn't underestimate the power of technology, but it's also the case that, for me, like scorpions, they all look the same to me. I look at a scorpion and I would say, oh, there's just no way that you could ever identify a scorpion based on a photograph. But if you look on iNaturalist, the people that are active iNaturalist in the scorpion world, for example, are amazing in their ability to do that. So I do believe that there are limits, but there are also cases where things seem, it's like too conservative. There's only so far that we can go from an image, but the case is that some individuals actually can go further. But, obviously certain taxa, you're just gonna have to stop at the genus level or whatever. And that's fine for me.
Okay, Lizzie was next.
Hi, really great talk. Thank you. I use iNaturalist for some of my teaching, and I really enjoyed the enthusiasm that you have for using this for the arachnological community as well. I was just wondering who decides on the curators for each of these groups, and at what level are people curating? Does each person have a family or an order? How does this work?
Yeah, it's been a while since I've kind of done that, but you contact the people who are in charge of iNaturalist. So there is oversight at the highest level, and you go from there. If anyone on here on this discussion has done that more recently, you can please chime in, but I became a curator so long ago that I don't really remember how it worked. But it's not just a free-for-all.
Okay, Victoria.
Oh, I didn't really have anything to add. I was just saying that even pictures that don't appear great from the onset can still be helpful in just identifying range maps, possible sites for later studies. So if we're talking about spiders that only genitalia can be used to identify them, it can still be useful to say, oh, they're in this location. Maybe no one's actually seen them. Maybe no one's actually mapped them there, that kind of thing. That's all.
Thanks. And I just realized I should say people's last names because I think the person that I was trying to go for was Victoria Schmalhofer. Sorry if I butchered your last name.
No, that's okay. You got it pretty close. It's Schmalhofer. So my question had been, basically, can anybody be an identifier? Or is there any kind of gatekeeping on that? Because you're going to get people who are more knowledgeable, less knowledgeable about the images that they're looking at.
Yep. Anyone can identify. And as I suggested at the end, it might become problematic, but of course, iNaturalist is dynamic, so you can have people identify, and then you can have someone later come in and say, well, see, what happens is that people kind of, there's a snowball effect. One person says this, then the other second person says this, even though they may not know. A third person will agree then. So it doesn't matter. If someone comes along and disagrees, then it kind of changes the status of the image. So they're not kind of set in stone. The identifications are not set in stone. But it is the case that some people can become kind of greedy with their identifications. They just get a little
Marshall, just to follow up with that, because a few people had asked in the chat is, can you tell us what exactly it means for an observation to be research grade and what the consent, like it's a consensus basically, but what is the definition of a research grade observation?
I think the definition right now is just two people who agree at the species level without disagreement.
Just to hop in, it's two-thirds of the IDs agree at a species level. So if there's a lot of IDs and it's going back and forth, as long as two-thirds of them agree, that's the definition they have in their like FAQ.
Okay.
Thanks, Sebastian.
Thanks,
okay,
Sebastian.
The next person who had a question was Fithria. Again, sorry if I'm getting people's names poorly. Fithria, if they're still here. Yes. Fithria Diniati, did you want to ask a question?
Yes. Marshal, I want to ask you about if we can upload some specimen in iNet.
Sorry, what is the question?
We have some specimen of spider, so
Yeah.
we can upload in iNet to identification.
You have images of the specimens?
Yeah.
Yeah, you just need images of the specimens.
Yeah. So we can.
Sure.
We can upload.
Yeah. And of course, you know, for most things, you'll want to take multiple diagnostic images, and of course, you can upload multiple images for any single observation.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Sanjay. Sanjay Das?
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you, sir, for very wonderful talk. Sir, I want to know if iNet is helpful for identifying specimens, particularly small spiders like money spiders, yeah, like any small spiders, how it is helpful for identification?
Yeah. You know, I would say that you would need a person who knows those spiders and is taking high quality images that are diagnostic for whatever taxonomic level. And they would initially collaborate with other people who also know those spiders. I can imagine a collaboration between, let's say, Mark Mark Milne and Mike Draney. And let's say that Mark starts uploading some images and Mike says, yeah, that's what that is. If you continue to do that for a taxon, then you get enough images so that the model can be trained. But it really starts with images that are high quality for small things, which will probably require something other than a phone. And it requires some a priori knowledge. It's obviously for the obscure things where there are limits, it's kind of a special model for the platform to learn. It's not really for someone who doesn't know anything. But that's fine as well.
So I'm gonna cut off questions here just so that we can get on to the discussion. And like I said, a lot of the questions did get answered to some extent in the chat, and we are gonna save the chat. And we're also going to afterwards send out a Google Doc for people who are interested in continuing joining the committee or being involved in community science with AAS to sign up, and then we'll get your emails and we can continue this discussion. And maybe we can even come up with an FAQ for arachnologists that have come out of the discussion. But so I'd like to try to move to discussions of ideas of what we can do with this as arachnologists, and a few people in the chat brought some up. So I'd like to highlight, Martine suggested we could do virtual BioBlitz in addition to doing a BioBlitz after the AAS meeting. And that's something we've been thinking about. I think that's a great idea, but do you want to talk a bit about that, Martine? Is Martine still here? Maybe not. Okay, so that's definitely something that I think is a great idea, and we talked about trying to organize one for this weekend, but we didn't have time. So if you're interested in being involved in organizing a virtual BioBlitz, please sign up. I think, so I wanted to ask something that came up in the chat and that Marshall mentioned was how it would be great if people put up their old images. Someone on the chat actually suggested, you know, iNaturalist is probably biased towards photogenic big things, but a lot of us have catalogs of photographs of our study species that could be put onto iNat. And similarly, it would be great if more of us, we are the people who have the expertise to identify things. Not everything is identifiable to species from photographs, obviously, but we can ID things to family and genus. It would be awesome if we would all go on iNat and start identifying things. So I kind of wanted to put it to the group of, what do you think it would take to get people regularly IDing, arachnologists regularly IDing stuff on iNat and putting up their old images in terms of motivation or coordination? And maybe you can say, raise hand. Mark, do you want to say something? If you want to chat, just say, I want to talk, I think, or just start talking.
Wayne Madison raised his hand.
Awesome, Wayne.
Hi, I'm about to reveal my ignorance about certain things in iNaturalist, and I guess I have a question before that might be answered quickly before I say something, which is, can you tag images by sort of type, like, you know, hashtag palp ventral? Can you do that?
Yep, you can add tags. Yep.
And can it filter by tags?
Yep.
Okay, so so then maybe then this isn't particularly a suggestion, but a sort of possible shift in interface at various points. The one case that I think is really informative about citizen science and its power, even though it might not seem to be that way initially, is the impact of the statistical programming language R in biology. And the reason is that R is something that's completely taken over a lot of fields in biology. And I think that the reason is the ramp from a beginning user to a sophisticated programmer and designer is a smooth ramp. It's not like most programming languages where you're either the user or the developer and there's a big divide between it. And iNaturalist has the opportunity to do a similar thing with respect to citizen science towards research, right? But some of the questions that came along about, well, what about small palps? You know, like they're not, you know, how are you going to put them in there? Is that encouraged and so forth? And if it were in some way organized or encouraged for us to be submitting our genitalic photos, for instance, or maybe photos, and those could be participating in the machine learning engine as well, you'd need two things. You'd need to have them taggable, as I said, so that it would give the machine learning engine the hint. So the machine learning engine would have to look at the tag and pay attention to it. And the second thing is there'd have to be voucher IDs as metadata allowed as well. And once you enable those two things, then suddenly its availability as a high-level research tool can become unlocked. And so the more things like that where even if most users don't see any of this because the default filtering hides, you know, anything that's tagged in certain ways or whatever, then for the rest of us, we can start building things on there. The Salticid community has been talking about, for instance, could we start to build a guide to North American Salticids? But, you know, to use the iNaturalist program platform right now, we'd want to make it easy to throw palp images up there and pigeonhole images up there and have that included. So I think that if the platform can be adjusted, and maybe it's already there, so that it allows that last step up to research use and has that ramp be smooth, suddenly I don't know, it seems like it could really have a big impact on our research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so iNaturalist has a guide, they have a guide feature, but they're no longer supporting the guide. But it's basically like if you typed in Salticidae, it would have an image guide to all of the species in a particular geographic area. The other thing that you can do is you can curate the images for a particular taxon. So if there's palp and apidget images in the database, then you just add those to the few images that are kind of, you always see when you type in that species. So in that way, it kind of becomes a visual guide. And then, in fact, if you're in any place, you look on your phone, you type in Salticidae, it shows you not the observations necessarily, but the placeholder images for that taxon. And we can add any diagnostic image as one of the placeholders. So there's possibilities there.
Tim? Oh, you're still muted.
Pushing that button again. Now am I talking? Okay. I wanted to go back to something that kind of got glossed over on research grade, and that is that it was, as was said, two people identify it, it's research grade. One of the flaws here is that observer A can submit, say, a salticid, and just submit it as a salticid, not know what it is. Someone else can come along and identify it as a particular species, and then observer A can go back and be the second identifier, even though he had no idea, or he or she had no idea what they had in the first place. Now they're just agreeing with what the first person said it was. And now, whoop, you're research grade, but you only really got one identification. The second identification was, you know, just the person going, okay, that's what I had. I think that's something that could be fixed, but I've heard people have tried to talk to the iNat people about fixing this, and they've dragged their heels or said they don't want to do that. Marshall, do you know anything about this? Or anybody out there?
What would your suggestion be for how to fix it?
Well, at the very least, the initial observer would not be one of the identifiers.
Okay.
Steve, that at very least.
Steve Tesler here. Enjoying my time here. Some of you may remember me, a grad student from the 70s. the last time I was involved. The answer to how do you get people involved? Retirement is the question. I'm 2 months retired. I just started using iNaturalist. I'm looking at Oedipus netzingeri in the Philadelphia area. I've been mapping it for 40 years. I have my own map tool and website, Map the Spider, which I bought in the .com in 2013. So a lot of projects have been going on. My complaints with iNaturalist, I only feel qualified to look at Adipids. I found 2 Spodros in Europe, which I fixed. I found a bunch of things that have been approved, like you're saying, this over-eagerness. I just retired from the US Geological Survey. I was involved with starting up their citizen science thing, and data management and data quality. I just had a whole career of that, so I'm very sensitive to it. Some of the IDs are just agreed. The answer to what do you do to firm that up is you say something about why you agree. I heard earlier, looking at the pictures of Habernatus, oh, there's this stripe on the leg, there's this. One thing I did not see on iNaturalist was for each species, these are the visual identifying characteristics, or that say you can identify this only to genus, and then you need the palps or something else. So I don't think any of the tools are really providing that. I've been using Bug Guide. I put the first pictures of the male of Oedipus netzingeri up there. I can put the same pictures up, and I might on iNaturalist. I think I'll find a new specimen and put those pictures up. But I could put the same picture in both places, the same record in both places. For data aggregators, this is going to cause a problem. And the main reason, by the way, that I started my own project is I'm only looking for purse webs. I want people to report purse webs. It's another step to try and identify them without killing them, which is one of my criteria for my project. So I'm enjoying iNaturalist. I'm not sure why I would want to switch over from Bug Guide. I found some quality problems. I dequalified a research grade observation and made it Oedipus netzingeri because I know this one really well. It's right where I've been studying it, but it was black, the picture, and it was automatically assigned to the black purseweb spider. And as it turns out, the species I work with in subdued light is olive and brown and has these nice shades. In high flash or high sunlight, it looks black, like a black ant. So how we control the quality of the images in terms of their utility for making a species ID is important. But I'm loving the conversation. You know, I'll sign up to be involved as a retired person might get. I'm already a volunteer. I lead hikes. So Sebastian interviewed me last year about the Tyler Arboretum Spider Project that I run out here. So if you want to talk more about that sort of stuff, you turn me on, you can't turn me off. So you have to take your time on that one. But I'm enjoying the conversation. These are serious questions. My background and my career really focused on quality data. How do you ensure that? And I'm not certain that any of these sites really do that. I did find on GBIF, I found a record for Oedipus netzingeri in Carolina or Georgia or something, and I traced it. Thankfully, I was able to trace it to someone reported in a master's thesis that got scanned on Park Service land, and it was in the species list, and they did not really have a background in identification, which is no one's fault. But those data records, they just get transmitted and eaten up by the data aggregators, and I think we really need to control that quality. My last comment, thank you for your patience, is we ought to have bioblitzes of the taxa that are already entered in the system to go in and identify the best pictures that show the features that we want, and at least create doubt on the ones that are not up to snuff, but a bunch of people just agreed to it.
So thank you for that. I'm gonna try to shift us more towards now talking about maybe solutions and things that we can do. And actually that's a nice segue. The idea of, I wanted to put as a question, if we wanted to come up with projects that we think would be good to do as a society. And another thing that I think that we can do is once we have our community science team, if any arachnologist wants to start a project, they could get in touch with us and we can kind of coordinate and publicize and things like that. so that we will kind of be a central hub for arachnology community science. But I wanted to ask if people have suggestions maybe for where to start with what taxa, for instance, that there already might be a lot of images on iNat that are it's possible to ID to species or genus fairly reliable from images, or what questions could we ask in terms of research questions on iNat, or more to the idea of outreach, like what taxa or questions might be best to get people involved and get them interested in arachnologists and going out and in arachnids, sorry, and going out and looking for them. So if folks want to chime in and have ideas about that, I would love to hear from you now.
I guess I'll speak up real quick and just say something that I've seen a lot of people say in chat. That one good thing that we can do to improve the quality of observations and identifications on iNaturalist is simply become active ourselves as experts, and have a project that could just be all American Arachnology Society members. These are all the things that we are IDing. As a reference to, this is what we think that these animals are as experts, but also there's not that many, at least in my experience, like really active spider IDers. And so the more of us that get on the platform, these questions of quality are going to become less of an issue, because we'll be the ones, not just each individual person, but us working together will improve the idea of stuff there, and then also improve the algorithm by doing so.
Thank you, Sebastian. And actually, on that note, yeah, I would hope that after this, and as we continue discussing this as the AAS, that people would be willing to sort of sign up or commit to regularly going on to iNat and IDing those taxa that they are experts in. I think Rachel made a comment to this effect in the chat, and I wonder if you wanted to speak up, if you had any ideas for how we might coordinate this kind of thing, or if you just wanted to add anything to that.
Can I say something based on Sebastian's comment? I think it's easy if a person just sets aside 1 hour a week, right? I mean, we all need to shadow numb in various ways. Maybe we binge watch, some stupid TV program. But, you're spending an hour a week, you make your subscriptions to things that you're interested in. And that's when you get on and you contribute to the greater good. It's, in my opinion, as arachnid scholars, people in the world, I mean, we know more about these animals than anyone else. It's almost our obligation to do that, take little slices of our time and do that.
Tim, did you want to follow up? And then Dave Richmond, I see you next.
Yeah, I had just a couple follow-ups to some of the stuff that's been said. One is that kind of a flip side of someone submitting something and it being identified incorrectly is, okay, that's easy enough for someone who's an expert to go look at all the pictures. Let's say when this just happened, I just saw it, it's probably still there. A clubionid is submitted as Mavia and Clemens from British Columbia. Okay, so well, I can go there as a salticid person and say, no, this is not a Mavia. But if someone who's studying clubionids is looking only at the clubionids, they're not going to find that record. And it might be a very interesting record to them, but they aren't going to be looking in this, if they're going to be looking in salticid images for clubionids and all the other spider groups for clubionids, it's going to take them forever to go through all those pictures and find all those misidentified clubionids that got stored somewhere else. So that's kind of a flip problem side to the problem of misidentification. And the other is, I wonder if there'd be some way to build a geographic filter into reports that would flag stuff. Like again, if you go to the Mavia page, you've got isolated reports of Mavia from all over the world, from India and Australia and Europe and Africa. And those should be flagged, it seems to me, somehow, so that people will pay attention to them and correct them more readily. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents there.
I actually think that that's true for well-known groups. They're automatically flagged. And for well-known groups, the species distribution, when it becomes well-known, is actually kind of outlined in green. So those things are can be part of the platform. I also want to make a comment, and Tim's making some great points, but we might be, there's this balance between how we might use the platform and outreach versus research. And as I suggested initially, we want to start with using the platform to inspire other people in various outreach activities. There might be some shortcomings in terms of how we might use the data in a research way, but that's not really what kind of we might be focusing about in this subcommittee. Of course, we don't want to misinform the public.
Dave Richmond, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I apologize first for being so dark, but I've got a bulb above me that's not working very well, and I'm getting less spry these days, so I don't get these things fixed. But I've been doing IDs for iNaturalist for quite some time, and also posting a few of my own observations, not just on spiders, but on some other things. And I have noticed one thing that was useful, and that is we've run across some introductions, and I've passed those on to Bruce Cutler because he was interested in working on introduction publications, so I can't really talk about it too much, but it's fairly obvious that this would be a great source for that kind of thing when a spider, which is obviously not part of the North American fauna, shows up. And one individual observation may be totally crazy, but we've been getting numerous ones of the same thing and of certain species. So that's a very useful piece. And of course, GBIF does pick this up. Admittedly, maybe their data firming, well, what I should say, being able to verify the data may be a little bit sketchy sometimes, but on the whole, it's useful to have that up on that website, those websites as well. There is always the problem that many spiders cannot be identified just from a photograph. And I've said that on numerous occasions when somebody's identified something, and I said, no, you can't identify it that way because I need to see the genitalia, I need to see the anatomy. And I think that's something we all have to do. But this can be a great platform nonetheless, because sometimes that's the, we don't know about things like some particular jumping spider from Europe that's suddenly shown up in the East Coast, for example. And that these people can be our eyes and ears. We can't be everywhere. And that can be very helpful in establishing interdose species, also distribution ranges. I've seen several things that have added to my distribution ranges of spiders that were easily identifiable from a photograph. And then just recently, somebody posted a picture of a Salticus from Arizona that I have no idea what it is, but I know that Salticus is being revised, I believe. And that's definitely not something I've ever seen before. Anyway, it's a useful tool. We just have to be careful, and we have to establish criteria, and but still, I don't see why we can't use it. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. So in the chat, Alec suggested for the issue of getting us on iNat and starting to ID things and getting a lot of expert IDs out there, Alex suggested something like a Wikipedia edit-a-thon style iNat ID-a-thon, and I think that's an awesome idea. Do you want to say anything about that, Alec?
Just that simply people getting together as a group to like egg each other on might be enough pressure. And like I've seen people like organizing Zoom like write-a-thons or whatever. So even if it isn't in person, just making it fun might be enough.
I think that's a great idea, and maybe that's an event that we could even have at our annual meeting to be in person, where on the final day or the day of the excursion, somewhere around that, people who don't want to go out and find spiders could get together and do an idea-thon, or it could happen at a different time so people could do both. I think that would be super fun. Jay Strafstrom suggested an example of a taxon that might be a great one, which is the ogre-faced spiders. Do you want to talk, Jay? Or I also wanted to bring it up to anyone, if anyone has done projects with spiders already and wants to share what's worked really well in terms of engaging with arachnid enthusiasts, or people who aren't yet arachnid enthusiasts but might not realize that they would be.
Yeah, so I didn't, you can hear me, I think. Yeah, so I didn't do this project, but I work on Deinopus spinosa. So I was pretty floored when I saw this came out. And in the original descriptions, it's only supposed to be in like Florida and southeastern Georgia. But it's all the way like west to Texas and in Mississippi. And I just went on to actually look at what the pictures are. And they're really easy to identify. I mean, they've got massive eyes. There's only supposed to be one species in the US. So it's one of those taxa that should be easy to identify, verify, and they're super cool. So there's that.
Awesome. You should sign up and we should make a project. I saw a hand up, but if you want to just jump in, go for it, because I can't find you right now. So I had some other questions, but while I'm thinking, Marshall, did you have any other ideas or questions that you think we could try to get feedback on right now?
I mean, I would emphasize that a lot of members of this society, maybe their gig is not spider diversity or arachnid diversity. So it's actually a place where members of our society can learn more about that diversity. And another thing that I think about as potentially problematic is how these platforms might come to kind of undermine deep knowledge of that diversity. If it becomes so easy where it becomes a little superficial and that people kind of run around with their phones and click pictures of things, and then maybe kind of forget to actually look and learn. That's kind of a deeper issue, but I think it's something that we need to think about.
If I could respond a bit to that concern, Marshall, I feel like that is I think a lot of people have reflected this concern that using iNaturalist is not a substitute for experienced identification keys and the knowledge of taxonomists that are trained in IDing these animals, which is true. That's just not what it's meant to do or meant to be. but I think we are right now, in terms of like how people go out and actually look at arachnids for a public facing thing like iNaturalist, we are in a place where the thing that we want to do is have people run around and look for arachnids and be excited that they found one. And that's something that we can really do with iNaturalist. We're still going to have taxonomists, we're still going to need taxonomists, and I think an important thing that we can do in when we are identifying things is using the features, the comments, and the notes saying, this species cannot be identified, or this animal cannot be identified past genus without looking at microscopic characteristics. Kind of acknowledging that more publicly, because a lot of people don't know that. And they might also just not know that all these things that look different or look the same superficially are different species. And so there might be a place for them to encounter that knowledge for the first time. Because for most other animals, different species just look drastically different, and they may not be familiar with the concept of cryptic or similar looking species.
Yeah, I agree that in terms of a virtual space to learn, it's wonderful, and moving forward, it's kind of sad and problematic to think about, learning about all of the environmental education programs, for example, that will go away. Maybe people having less access to nature. This can still kind of allow people to learn about nature.
So coming back to the idea of what kind of things we could do if people have suggestions, I wanted to mention that a colleague and I have been doing a thing where we're looking at the iNat data that exists already in Canada to sort of understand what people are going out and looking at. So we're focused on all terrestrial arthropods. We downloaded the data for just a single year of observations in Canada, and got, I think, 100,000 observations. And it was really surprising to us that after plants were the most commonly uploaded taxon, terrestrial arthropods were number 2. So people are out there looking at bugs and spiders and scorpions and all of these things. And so I think that iNat really gives us an opportunity to connect with people who are already going outside or just in their backyard or in their house taking photos of the animals that they see. And so one thing I've done in the past is I've done in-person bioblitzes where there's a bioblitz has been organized for a national park or a particular area, and usually there's a museum involved, and I've been asked to go in and lead like a spider walk where I teach people how to collect spiders. With those bioblitzes, usually the idea is to get specimens, but that kind of thing where we actually go out and interact with people and teach them something about how to collect animals, well, how to find them where they are. We can talk about their natural history and get them excited about these animals. But then also, instead of doing the, collecting, we could also teach people how to take good photos for iNaturalist. What would be the best thing to do so that they can upload their photos and send. So then after a bioblitz, I would guess that most people probably don't go around collecting animals and depositing them in their local museum, but they could continue to go out using iNaturalist. So yeah, that's sort of what I'm thinking of it's a great opportunity. And I hope we can sort of brainstorm ideas for events like this and things that we can do, and maybe coordinating like a national arachnid bioblitz day every year where local people could do their own one in their community or something like that. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if anyone's commenting and wants to jump in.
Catherine, I was interested in, I don't know if I can jump in here, but one of the things it seems like would be dramatically less represented would be nocturnal animals or animals that are primarily active at night. And you mentioned plants and terrestrial invertebrates. Those are all things that are either small enough that they can't get away quickly, or they don't move at all, like the plants, well, in the wind, but they don't move around. And it seems like iNaturalist is going to underrepresent things like bats and, well, I guess that'd be one great example, but things that are too fast for people to get a phone photograph of that's worth anything. So those are built-in biases. I wonder if there's a way to use iNaturalist observations combined with more traditional census information to rate the visibility or appearancy of creatures in a particular place. For example, you could go to a place that's been well surveyed, like Great Smoky Mountain National Park, where there was a huge BioBlitz survey there, and compare the data on actual known distributions to what's been submitted from the public, and then you could give a score for appearancy to different things. That seems like an interesting idea to me.
So that's a great point, and some people brought up this issue of bias in the chat earlier as well. And so I want to address the first thing you said about nocturnal animals. So we were able to download all of the data about the IDs, the geotags, the dates and the times of the observations when the photo was taken. And for some taxa, you can actually see like day and seasonal things. Like there's already some of that is captured. Obviously, you don't have the sampling effort standardized like you would if you were going out to do a systematic survey. But people are going out at night, and I think I don't know, but there's the data for moths is great. There's a lot of data for nighttime moths, and I think there seem to be like communities like the moth people and the odonate people, at least within the Canadian data, where there's a huge number of species that have been identified on iNat research grade that is like a huge proportion of the known species of odonates and of moths from Canada. And so I think we need to do the work of having events and organizing things where we get people going out and doing, like focusing on a particular taxon, going out at night, going out or at regular times of the year, and we can make projects to encourage people to do those kinds of things. Another example that I want to bring up is Joe Bowden, who's a Canadian arachnologist, recently had a paper published based on an iNat project that he did in Prince Edward Island in Canada. And so he was basically encouraging, they did a whole sort of outreach blitz, encouraging people in Prince Edward Island to go out and upload photos of spiders to iNat. And they like quadrupled the number of species known from Prince Edward Island based on that project, which is huge. And that's from, a lot of those were new species just based on the IDs from photographs. So it is super powerful, and I think we need to sort of come up with ideas and goals, and then act on those to make things happen. Marshall, did you want to maybe try to wrap things up?
Well, I would say that look for that email, and once you get it, please add your name as someone who's potentially interested in it, and then add your ideas. We'll obviously take the ideas from the chat as well. And we need a way to connect with strong iNat observers and identifiers who weren't in this forum. So think of a way to do that as well.
Greta, do you want to have the final word?
I'll just step in and express my gratitude. So I want to thank everybody that's shown up today. I am so encouraged and energized by all the ideas, by the clear commitment to understanding the diversity of arachnids, and doing that in a way that's inclusive, and looking outward, and bringing in and cultivating the love of biodiversity as broadly as we can. And this group of people is exactly the group that's in a great position to do that. And so I'm super thankful to Marshall and Catherine and Sebastian for taking this on and just making this event happen. I will say that I also realized I introduced Marshall, but I didn't formally introduce Catherine or Sebastian. Many of you know them because they're very doing an amazing job in the Twitter sphere and the public outreach realm, social media realm. Catherine is currently a postdoc at Acadia in Canada. She did her PhD with May Diane Andrade. And Sebastian is did his PhD at the University of Pittsburgh with Nate Morehouse and Corinne Richards-Zowacki. We're lucky that we have their energies focused on the AAS and how we can expand and galvanize, unify our outreach efforts. I also want to say to everybody, we've got the leadership in place for the outreach committee. We're still creating teams to make it happen. And so we will create avenues to welcome all the great ideas and input and energies you all have out there collectively. More like immediately tomorrow, we have happy hours, and Catherine has agreed to be present at the community science happy hour, so you can show up and talk with her. A number of people mentioned an interest in tips about photography, so there's a happy hour for that. I think, Rich, we have a host for the happy hour. I can't remember who that is, but.
Yeah, I'm one of the names at least.
Okay, great. Yeah, so come together around these ideas. If you have ideas that have emerged from any of these conversations for happy hour breakout rooms you would like to see, let me know. Just send me an email. We can make it happen. Yeah, I think that's all I'll say at this point. I will point out, we recorded this entire session. We intend to make it available to everybody that's at this meeting. So thanks again.
Thanks, Greta. Thanks, everyone.